In my past life, I won 50 million in the lottery, 40 million after taxes. Barely got to enjoy the rich life before the apocalypse hit. My girlfriend sold me out for the price of a cookie. I died a horrible death in a zombie horde. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in front of the bank, still clutching that $50 million lottery ticket. The memories of being eaten alive by zombies were so real. I'm still freaking out, heart pounding like crazy. After calming down, I rushed past the bank and ran to a restaurant nearby, ordered the most basic egg fried rice. The rice and eggs in my mouth tasted so good it felt unreal. I hadn't eaten rice in 3 months during the apocalypse. In the apocalypse, I only survived 3 months eating this delicious fried rice. I literally cried. Nobody knew that before the end times. I hated egg fried rice. I thought it tasted fishy. After leaving the restaurant, I went to a store and bought a mascot costume, put one on and went to cash in my ticket. After taxes, exactly 40 million. This time, I didn't call my girlfriend, just sent her a text. We're done. Hope you and Shin Kong are happy. I only found out after the apocalypse. In my past life, my girlfriend had been cheating with Shin Kong. If she didn't know I won 50 million, she probably would have dumped me already. After sending the text, I checked the date. Only 20 days until the apocalypse. Gotta hurry. This time, I just want to survive. I spent 20 million on a villa nearby. 3 floors total, locations in the suburbs. Main thing is it's all villas here compared to high-rise apartments. Fewer people when the apocalypse comes. Fewer zombies, better survival odds. I asked about the villa's materials. Pretty solid construction, deep foundation, good soil quality. Even so, I wasn't satisfied. I hired the best local renovation company to replace all the glass with bulletproof, and added one-way privacy film, so people outside can't see inside. Because in the apocalypse, the scariest thing isn't zombies, it's human nature. Not just that, the exterior walls, I had them soundproofed. Best materials only because zombies can hear sounds. At the current renovation pace, it'll take about 20 days to finish. Panic mode activated. I found the renovation manager and told him to finish in 10 days. Money is no issue. When the manager asked why I was in such a rush, I said this villa is for my family. Wanted to surprise them. In 10 days they're coming over. That wasn't a lie. In my past life before the apocalypse, my family was supposed to visit. I really did want to surprise them. Too bad the virus broke out on their way here. I never found out what happened to them, so this time I called them ahead of time. Told them I really missed them and wanted them to come stay for a while. Already bought the tickets. Got them on the earliest flight. Right now, family hasn't arrived and the house isn't done. But I can't just sit around. During the day, I supervised the renovation and made sure nothing was missed. Also hired some guys to install solar panels on the villa. A few days into the apocalypse, the power grid collapsed, nationwide blackout. The villa's roof, I had the workers seal the whole thing up. The roof's only like 30 feet high. If someone got in from the top, I'd be screwed. Also sealed all the balconies. Added security bars and bulletproof glass. On top of that, I hit up a hardware store and replaced all the locks with the most secure ones. Bank-grade locks, especially the front door. I upgraded it to vault-level security and added 2 more doors. To get in from outside, you'd have to break through 3 doors. Seeing the workers were doing quality work on time, I went to a dealership and bought a heavy-duty SUV plus an RV. In case the villa can't hold, we have an escape option. Then I drove the SUV to a nearby supermarket. Rice flour, cooking oil, salt, vinegar, soy sauce, sesame oil, bottled water, instant noodles, bread, snacks, you name it, anything that keeps. I got 20 cases of each. On the way home, past a pharmacy, stocked up on common meds. Once the workers left at night, I secretly moved everything into the villa. If word got out I was hoarding supplies, I'd be a walking target. Finally, on day 10, the villa was done. Same day, my parents arrived with my sister. When we got home, I didn't hide anything. Told my family the apocalypse was coming and we needed to prepare. Of course, none of them believed me. Mom, stop joking around. Mom looked at me all worried, feeling my forehead over and over me. You're not burning up, Mom. I'm serious. Me, if you don't believe me, old man G from our village is gonna die tonight. My parents' faces changed instantly. They scolded, what are you talking about? Old man G is healthy as a horse. Just saw him working in the fields 2 days ago. I didn't bother arguing. Tonight, they'd know I was telling the truth. In my past life, my parents said they'd finish the farm work before visiting, but right when they were about to come, Mom called saying old man G had passed away, so they had to delay a few days. Mom said on the phone, old man G was walking home from the fields when he fell down a slope. Died that night at the hospital. Life's unpredictable. The next moment always catches you off guard. During dinner, Mom cooked a whole table of food. Smelled amazing, brought back memories. Mom, come on, eat more. Mom, look how skinny you got. Mom, working so hard in the big city. Ha! Mom lovingly put food in my bowl. Dad looked at me with concern too. You doing okay? Before I could finish my sentence, a phone rang and cut me off. Dad got up, reached into his pocket and answered. Dad, you guys keep eating. He walked out to the balcony. When he came back, his expression was serious. Me, what's wrong, old man who called? Mom was putting food in mine and my sister's bowls, asking casually, Dad, the GE family's eldest, called. Dad said, old man G died tonight. Mom was completely shocked. The meat on her chopsticks fell without her noticing. Dad silently pulled out a cigarette and lit it. Death countdown, 9 days until the apocalypse. Not much time left and we're way short on supplies. First thing in the morning, I went to a dealership and bought a brand new semi-truck. Time for a supply run out of town. Buying too much locally would raise suspicion. Last few days because of the workers. I couldn't stockpile big. Now I can finally go all out. Plus, Dad's here now. He used to drive semis, did long hauls. This truck's easy for him. We drove straight to a big supermarket in another city. This time I didn't even go to the store floor. Went straight to the manager. I told him we're donating supplies to kids in the mountains. Since our schedule's tight, the factory can't deliver in time, so we're buying from the supermarket. The manager was so excited, he didn't even question it. After checking my list, he had his guys load everything onto the semi. This time I went all in. Cooking oil. How much you got? I'll take it all. Snacks. Whatever's in the warehouse. Load it up. Self-heating meals. I'll take every single one. Bottled water, sodas. Anything in stock, throw it on the truck. Meat, fresh produce. Dairy, they don't keep well, but I still got some, since meat doesn't store long. I called Mom who was organizing stuff at the villa. Told her to buy 5 big freezers just for meat. While she's at it, grab some pots, pans and dishes too. While the workers were loading, Dad spotted some soil in the corner of the warehouse. Bought that too. Also grabbed vegetable and fruit seeds, plus a bunch of water purifiers. We basically emptied most of the warehouse, and the semi was just barely full. Let's buy some clothes and blankets to fill the gaps. I mean, after the apocalypse, the weather gets crazy, unpredictable. Super extreme, hot and cold. Because of the extreme weather, plenty of people don't make it. Dad agreed. We ended up buying blankets, 10 winter coats each, 10 padded outfits, plus fans, space heaters, electric blankets, and dozens of boxes of hand warmers and cooling packs. By the time we drove back to the city, it was 1 a.m. Super quiet since the semi was too big to fit into the villa area. We spent the night carefully hauling everything in trip by trip. Finally got most of it moved before sunrise. Whatever was left when we leave for another city, Mom and my sister can move it at night. After resting that afternoon, Dad drove the smaller truck I bought, and we headed to another nearby city. With the experience from before, this run went smooth. But this time, Dad and I decided to stock up on daily essentials, entertainment stuff and weapons. By the time we got back, a day and night had passed. Mom and my sister had already moved all the remaining supplies into the villa. At this point, floors 2 and 3 were packed with supplies. Once again, nighttime. No one around, time for the family to hustle. This truck was smaller, so we got everything sorted before dawn. Next morning, Dad and I went to the local wholesale market but didn't buy much. Aside from not wanting to look suspicious, we're basically out of storage space, so we bought about the same as other vendors. On the way back, my phone rang. Didn't expect it to be her. My phone screen showed her name Lin Xiaomei, and for a second I just stared at it while the wholesale market noise buzzed around us. Dad glanced over. Who is it? Nobody important, I said, and let it ring out. It rang again 30 seconds later. I answered this time, just to make it stop. What? Wenhao. Her voice was soft in the way it used to be when she wanted something. I heard you won the lottery. Of course she'd heard. In my past life it had taken her exactly 4 days to find out, and by then I'd already told her I loved her and she'd already been sleeping with Shin Kong for 2 months. We're done, I said. I already told you that. I know, I was wrong, I panicked, I didn't mean any of it with Shinkong, it just happened and I've regretted it every single day. Xiao Mei. Please, can we just talk? In person? I miss you. She called 4 more times over the next hour. I let them all go to voicemail. The 5th time, she texted instead, I know about the 40 million. I don't care about the money. I just want you back. Please. I stared at that message for a long moment. In my past life I'd believed a version of that sentence. I'd wanted so badly to believe someone loved me for something other than money that I'd let her back into my life for 3 more weeks before the world ended and she left me to die for a stranger's cookie. A literal cookie. That's what my life had been worth to her. I blocked the number. Dad, driving, glanced over. Girlfriend trouble. Ex-girlfriend. And it's handled. You seem calm about it. I've had time to process, I said, which was true in a way he couldn't understand. He didn't push further. That was one of the things about my father, he knew which doors not to open. Back at the villa, Mom and my sister Wengzhen had already started organizing the second floor into zones. Mom had, without being asked, created a labeling system using masking tape and a marker: food, grains, food, canned, medical, clothing, and I stood in the doorway for a second just looking at it. You believe me now? I asked. Mom didn't look up from the box she was sorting. Old man G is dead, Wenhao. I don't know what's happening, but I know you knew before it happened. That's not something I can explain away. So you believe the rest? She finally looked at me. Her eyes were tired in a way I hadn't seen before, not physically tired, but the specific exhaustion of someone recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the world. I believe you're trying to save us, she said. That's enough for me to keep organizing boxes. Wengzhen, 19 and normally glued to her phone, was taping a box shut with unusual focus. That night, after everyone else went to sleep, I sat alone in what would become the command room, a converted study on the second floor with the villa's security monitors, a shortwave radio I'd bought on a whim, and a wall map of the surrounding area. 8 days left. I pulled out a notebook and started listing what still needed doing. Water purification system installed, needs testing. Backup generator arrives tomorrow. Medical supplies adequate for 6 months, need to verify expiration dates. Defense, this was the item I kept circling back to. In my past life I hadn't had weapons. I hadn't known I'd need them until the first infected neighbor broke down my apartment door with his bare, blood-crusted hands and I'd fought him off with a kitchen knife and pure adrenaline, only to be bitten 3 weeks later by someone I trusted. I showed him 2 hunting rifles, purchased legally through a connection who did quiet, expedited paperwork for the right price. A shotgun. Ammunition stored in a separate locked case per regulation. A crossbow, which I'd bought mostly because it was quiet and I remembered, in my past life, how the sound of gunfire had drawn more zombies than it had ever saved me from. Dad picked up one of the rifles and checked it with the easy competence of someone who'd handled weapons before. Military service, he said, seeing my surprise. Long time ago. Before you were born. You never told me that. Never came up. He set the rifle down and looked at me. Wenhao, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. Not just old man G and a vague warning about an apocalypse. What exactly is coming? I'd been avoiding this conversation, partly because the full truth sounded insane even to me, and partly because saying it out loud made it more real than I could comfortably hold. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. You died, he said finally. Eaten alive. Slowly. I remember every second of it. And your mother and sister. I don't know what happened to you all in my past life. You were supposed to visit, but old man G's death delayed you. By the time the outbreak hit, the roads were already chaos. I never found out. His jaw tightened. That's why you brought us here early, he said. That's why I bought a villa, hired a renovation crew, bought 2 trucks, and emptied half a supermarket's warehouse in 8 days, I said. Yes. He looked at the rifle on the table between us. Does your sister know? Your mother. Not the specifics. Just that I knew about old man G and that something is coming. You should tell them everything. I know. I rubbed my face. I didn't want to sound insane before there was proof. I told Mom and Wengzhen everything the next morning over breakfast. The lottery. The apocalypse. My death. The reset. Mom's chopsticks stopped halfway to her mouth. Wengzhen's face went through several expressions before settling into something I could only describe as grim acceptance. So you've lived through this before, Wengzhen said slowly. You actually died. And now you're, replaying it. Something like that. And Xiaomei, Mom started. Cheated with a man named Shinkong for months before the outbreak. When the zombies came, she chose to save him instead of me. Used a cookie as bait to lure me away so he could take my supplies. Mom's face went white. That woman was at Chinese New Year dinner last year. I know. I made her dumplings. I know, Mom. Wengzhen, always the practical one, cut through the shock faster than either parent. Okay, so we know it's real. We know roughly when it's coming, 7 days now. What do we still need to do that we haven't done? We spent that afternoon in the backyard, which I'd had fenced with reinforced steel panels disguised as decorative garden walls. Dad handled the rifle instruction. He was a natural teacher, patient, precise, correcting Wengzhen's stance without making her feel foolish about it. Mom refused the rifle entirely. I'm 61 years old, she said. I'm not going to become a markswoman in a week. That's fine, I told her. Not everyone needs to be on defense. You'll manage supplies, medical triage, and communications. That's just as important. She seemed relieved by that division of labor. Wengzhen, on the other hand, turned out to have unexpectedly good aim. She'd apparently spent an embarrassing number of hours at an arcade shooting gallery in high school, which had translated better than any of us expected. Not bad, Dad said, watching her hit a paper target 3 times in a row. I used to beat all the boys at the arcade, she said, not looking up. Guess it's useful now. The generator arrived the next morning, along with a technician who installed it with professional efficiency and no questions asked. I'd learned that unmarked cash tended to prevent curiosity. While he worked, I checked the water purification system with Dad, running test cycles to make sure the filters were functioning correctly under load. This is a lot of engineering for a family villa, the technician commented at one point, glancing at the reinforced walls and the bank of solar panels. Storm season's been bad lately, I said. Better safe than sorry. He accepted that without further comment. People generally accepted whatever explanation required the least follow-up. After he left, I did a full inventory walkthrough with Wengzhen, who'd appointed herself supply manager without anyone officially assigning the role. 5 days left. I drove into the city alone that morning, telling my family I needed to handle some final banking matters. That part was true, but I also had one more stop to make. I parked outside my old apartment complex and sat in the car for a while before going up. My landlord answered the door, confused to see me. Mr. Chin, I'm terminating my lease early, I said. I know it's short notice. I'll pay whatever penalty is required. He blinked. You just renewed 6 months ago. Circumstances changed. I handed him an envelope with enough cash to cover any penalty 3 times over. I need to be fully moved out within 2 days. He took the envelope, still confused, but not confused enough to argue with that much money. I spent the rest of the day packing what remained of my old life into boxes. Not much, honestly. A few books, some clothes, a photo of my grandmother that I'd never gotten around to framing. On my way back to the villa, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Then something made me pick up. Wenhao. A man's voice. Careful. Familiar in a way that made my stomach drop before my brain caught up with why. Shun Kong. How did you get this number? I said. Flat. Xiaomei gave it to me. Look, I know this is awkward, but I wanted to talk to you man to man. There's nothing to talk about. She's been a mess since you cut her off. I think you should know she really does regret what happened between us. It was a mistake. We both know it was a mistake. I don't care, I said, about either of you. Lose this number. Wenhao, come on. We used to be friends. We were never friends, I said. You were sleeping with my girlfriend for 2 months while pretending to be my friend. Those aren't the same thing. Silence on the other end. Then, quieter, I heard about the money. I'm not calling about that. I swear. That evening, I told my family about the calls. Dad's expression darkened. Should we be worried about them showing up here? They don't know the address, I said. And even if they did, it wouldn't matter. This place is a fortress. Nobody's getting in that we don't let in. What if they need help? Mom asked. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, like she knew the question might not be welcome. When it happens, if they come asking. I thought about the cookie. About watching, in my dying moments, the way Xiaomei's face had shown nothing but relief when the zombie chose me instead of her. They made their choice already, I said. In another life, they showed me exactly who they are when it mattered most. I'm not obligated to save people who already sacrificed me once. Mom didn't argue further. She just nodded slowly, understanding something in my tone that made her not push. 3 days left. The electrician finished the last of the backup wiring, connecting every essential system to the generator and solar array in a configuration that could theoretically keep the villa running for months without outside power. I spent the morning with Dad reinforcing the front gate in addition to the original security plan that I decided was necessary after running through worst-case scenarios one too many times. "You're being very thorough," Dad said, welding a support brace into place while I held it steady. "I died once because I wasn't thorough enough," I said. "I don't intend to make that mistake twice." He was quiet for a moment, working. "Wenhao, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "In your other life, before all this, were you happy?" The question caught me off guard. 2 days left. We did a full dry run that morning, a complete lockdown drill, timed with a stopwatch, everyone moving to their assigned positions. Dad and Wengzin took defensive posts near the reinforced windows on the second floor. Mom moved to the medical station we'd set up in what used to be a guest bathroom, now stocked with more supplies than most small clinics. I handled the main entry point, testing how quickly all 3 door locks could be engaged. 4 minutes and 12 seconds from Wengzin's warning shout to full lockdown. "Too slow," I said, checking the stopwatch again. "We need to be under 3 minutes. "It's a big house," Wengzin said, slightly out of breath. "It won't matter how big it is if something's already inside when we hit 3 minutes and 12 seconds, I said. Again. We ran it 4 more times. By the 4th run, we'd shaved it down to 2 minutes 40 seconds. "Better," I said, and meant it. That night, unable to sleep, I walked the perimeter of the villa alone. The reinforced fence caught moonlight along its edges. The solar panels sat dark and quiet on the roof, waiting for a sun that would rise on an entirely different kind of world in 2 days. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city hummed with its usual oblivious nighttime rhythm, traffic, distant music, the ordinary sounds of people who had no idea what was coming. I thought about all the people out there. Neighbors, co-workers I used to have, the barista who used to remember my order at the coffee shop near my old apartment. None of them knew. The last day passed in a blur of final preparations. We topped off every water container. Ran one more full diagnostic on the generator. Mom did a final inventory check of the medical supplies, cross-referencing everything against a list she'd printed from some obscure survival forum she'd apparently been reading obsessively for the past week without telling anyone. Dad and I reinforced the last weak point I'd identified as side window on the ground floor that I'd somehow overlooked in the initial security sweep. Wengzin spent the afternoon doing something I hadn't asked her to do, writing letters. To friends. To people she cared about who wouldn't be joining us. "What are those for?" I asked, finding her at the kitchen table surrounded by paper. "I don't know," she admitted. "I guess I just wanted to say things while I still could. Even if I never send them. Even if it doesn't matter." I sat down across from her. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed running through every scenario one more time, listening to the ordinary sounds of the house settling, waiting for a morning I already knew was coming. At exactly 6:47 a.m., the same time it had happened in my past life, a detail I remembered with sickening clarity, the first emergency alert hit every phone in the house simultaneously. The sound was jarring enough that I heard Wengzin cry out from her room down the hall. I was already up, already moving. "Everyone to positions," I shouted, pulling on clothes as I moved. "This is it. This is real." Dad appeared in the hallway already dressed. He'd apparently slept in his clothes, some instinct telling him the same thing mine had told me. Mom followed seconds later, pale but moving with purpose toward the medical station. Wengzin's door burst open. "The news, they're saying it's some kind of viral outbreak, contained to 3 cities, but Wenhao, one of them is us." For the first 6 hours, we simply watched. The villa's external cameras fed into the monitors in the command room, giving us a view of the street outside without exposing ourselves to any windows. I sat glued to the screens, watching the neighborhood I'd chosen specifically for its low density slowly descend into chaos anyway. A car crashed into a lamppost 2 streets over, no one got out. A man ran past our gate, looking over his shoulder, disappearing from frame before I could tell what he was running from. By hour 4, the first infected appeared on camera. A woman, moving with the wrong kind of urgency, her gait broken and wrong in ways that made my stomach clench with memory. She stumbled past our reinforced fence without noticing it, drawn toward sounds further down the street. "That's one of them," Wengzin said quietly, standing behind me. "That's actually one of them." "Yes. You really lived through this before." By the second day, the power grid failed exactly as I'd predicted. Our generator kicked in automatically, and the solar panels, untouched by whatever had taken down the city's infrastructure, continued charging our backup batteries during daylight hours. We were, as far as I could tell from the cameras, one of very few functioning households on the entire street. The silence outside had a texture to it now. Not empty silence, the kind of silence that meant something was still out there, moving, waiting, occasionally punctuated by a distant scream or a crash of something breaking that none of us investigated too closely. Wengzin had taken to cataloging everything she saw on the monitors in a notebook, an obsessive habit that seemed to help her process what was happening. On the third day, someone tried the front gate. Not a zombie, the gate's motion sensors and camera showed a living person, a man in his 40s, pounding on the reinforced metal and shouting for help. "Please, is anyone in there? I have my kids with me, please, we just need somewhere safe." I watched the screen with my jaw tight. Dad appeared beside me. "Wenhao. I know. We have the supplies. We planned for a family of 4 with margin for emergencies." "We don't know him," I said. "We don't know if he's bitten, if he's dangerous, if opening that gate for 2 minutes lets in more than just him. He has children." I looked at the screen again. 2 kids, maybe 8 and 11, huddled behind the man's legs, both crying. Something in my chest twisted. "If we open the gate, even for a second, we compromise everything we've built," I said. "Everyone inside this house is depending on that not happening. So we just let them die out there?" I ran to the command room and pulled up the side entrance camera. It was a narrow passage between the villa's east wall and the neighboring property's fence, accessible from outside through a locked gate I could control remotely, and from inside through a single reinforced door that led into what we'd designated as a decontamination area. A space I'd specifically built for exactly this kind of situation, though I hadn't fully admitted that to myself until now. "There's a way," I said, returning to the front monitor room, "but we do it my way. Everyone gets checked for bites before they come further than the Deccan room. Anyone showing symptoms doesn't come in. I don't care how much it hurts to say no." Dad nodded immediately. Mom's jaw was tight, but she nodded too. I activated the intercom connected to the front gate. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man on the screen startled, looking around for the source of the voice. Yes, I can hear you, please." The man's name was Zhou Ping. His children were Zhou Lele, 11, and Zhou Xiaobao, 8. They checked out clean, no bites, no obvious infection, just exhaustion, dehydration, and the particular terror of people who'd been running for 3 days straight. Zhou Ping cried when Mom brought them water and a simple meal in the Deccan room. "My wife didn't make it," he said, voice breaking. "We got separated on the first day. I don't know if she's..." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "I'm sorry," Mom said, and meant it. After they'd rested and eaten, I sat down with Zhou Ping while the kids slept, exhausted, on a cot Wengzin had set up for them. "I can't offer you permanent shelter," I said carefully. "This house is built for my family's survival with careful margins. Adding people long-term changes those calculations significantly." He nodded slowly, understanding without arguing. "I understand. Even one night is more than we had an hour ago." We let the Zhou family rest for 2 days before sending them on their way. I packed them a bag with enough food and water to last 2 weeks, a first aid kit, one of the smaller hunting knives from our supply, and a hand-crank radio I'd bought in bulk without expecting to need more than one. Zhou Lele, the 11-year-old, hugged Wengzin before they left. "Thank you for letting us stay," she said, small and formal in the way children are when they're trying very hard to be brave. "Stay safe out there," Wengzin said, and I could see her blinking back tears. Zhou Ping shook my hand at the side gate. "I don't know how to repay this," he said. "You don't have to," I said. "Just survive. Get your kids somewhere safe." He nodded, adjusted the pack on his shoulders, and took his children's hands. I watched them disappear down the street on the camera feed until they turned a corner and were gone. By day 7, we'd fallen into a rhythm. Monitor shifts, rotating through the family so no one stayed glued to the screens for too many hours at a stretch. Meal times, carefully rationed but still communal, still something that felt like normalcy in the middle of everything falling apart. Sleep shifts, ensuring someone was always awake and alert. The infected outside had multiplied. What had started as scattered individuals wandering the street had become clusters, sometimes dozens at once, drawn by sounds from the city center that we couldn't identify but that seemed to be growing more frequent and more distant. "They're moving toward downtown," Wengzin observed one evening, reviewing a week's worth of notebook entries. "The numbers passing our street have been decreasing the last 2 days. 2 weeks in, we lost contact with the outside world almost entirely. The radio broadcasts became sporadic, then stopped. Cell service had died in the first 3 days. The internet, running on backup infrastructure for a while, finally went dark on day 11. We were, for all practical purposes, alone. But alone in a fortress with 8 months of supplies, functioning power, clean water, and 4 people who trusted each other completely was a very different kind of alone than what I'd experienced in my past life, scrambling between abandoned buildings, trusting no one, watching people I'd known for years turn on each other over a can of beans. We'd started a small garden on the 3rd-floor terrace, exactly as Wengzin had suggested weeks earlier. Nothing substantial yet, but the seeds Dad had bought were beginning to sprout, small green shoots pushing up through soil that had been stored in a warehouse corner and repurposed for survival. 3 weeks in, the perimeter fence was tested for the first time. Not by infected, by people. The camera picked up movement at 2 a.m., 3 figures approaching the fence with deliberate caution, clearly scouting rather than fleeing in panic. My instincts, honed by weeks of monitoring, immediately flagged the difference. "Everyone up," I said quietly into the house intercom. "We have visitors, and I don't think they're friendly." Dad and Wengzin took their defensive positions without hesitation, weapons ready but not yet raised. Mom moved to secure the medical station and prepare for any scenario. I watched the monitors as the 3 figures circled the perimeter, testing the fence at several points, clearly looking for a weakness. "They're organized," Dad observed, watching over my shoulder. "That's not desperation. That's a plan." "Scavengers," I said. "Looking for houses that survived intact. We're probably not the first place they've checked tonight." They came back 2 nights later. This time with more people. 6 figures on the monitor, moving with the same deliberate purpose as before, but bolder now, less concerned about the floodlights. "They know we're occupied," Wengzin said, watching from beside me. "They know there's something worth taking in here." I thought fast, running through the defensive protocols we'd trained for, adjusting them in real time for a threat I hadn't fully anticipated. Not zombies, but people, organized and desperate enough to plan a coordinated approach. "Dad, take the north window position," I said. "Wengzin, south. If they breach the outer fence, I want warning shots only unless they make it past the second barrier. We don't want to escalate unless we absolutely have to. And if they do make it past the second barrier?" Dad asked. I didn't answer that directly. We all understood what it would mean. I spent the next several days reinforcing our detection capabilities. Motion sensors along the entire perimeter, not just the main gate. A better camera system with night vision that actually worked instead of the grainy, barely functional feed we'd been relying on. Tripwires connected to noise alarms at key approach points, quiet enough not to draw more attention, loud enough to wake everyone instantly if triggered. Dad helped me install most of it, working with the same quiet competence he'd shown throughout everything we'd built together. "You really thought this apocalypse would be mostly about zombies," he said at one point, tightening a bolt on a motion sensor bracket. "Turns out people might be the bigger problem." "I knew that going in," I said. "I told you, back when we first started renovating. The scariest thing in an apocalypse isn't zombies. It's what people do to each other when the rules stop applying." You were right about that too, apparently. 1 month into the apocalypse, we received an unexpected radio transmission. Not military this time. A civilian frequency, someone broadcasting on repeat, voice tired but steady. "This is a message for anyone still listening. We've established a small community at the old textile factory on Jiangbei Road. We have defensible walls, a water source, and space for more survivors. If you can make it here safely, you're welcome. If you can't, please stay safe wherever you are." The message repeated every 10 minutes, day and night. "Should we reach out?" Wengzin asked, listening with the rest of us gathered around the radio. I thought about it carefully. In my past life, I'd never heard this broadcast. I'd been too busy simply trying to survive day to day to have functioning radio access, let alone the luxury of considering community options. 6 weeks in, my phone, long since useless for calls but still functioning as a device with stored files, buzzed with an alert I hadn't expected. A text message. Delayed, somehow finally pushing through some fragment of network infrastructure that had briefly flickered back to life. From Xiaomei. "Wenhao, please, if you get this. I'm alone. Shinkong is dead. I don't know what to do. I remember you mentioned once you were looking at properties in the suburbs, some big renovation project. Please, if you're safe, if you can hear this, I need help." I stared at the message for a long time. Wengzin, sitting nearby, noticed my expression. "What is it?" I showed her the phone without a word. Her face hardened. "She wants to come here. She doesn't know where here is," I said. "I never told her about this place. She's guessing based on something I mentioned before all of this happened." "Are you going to answer her?" 2 months into the apocalypse, the garden on the 3rd floor terrace had become a genuine source of food, not just a hopeful experiment. Tomatoes, small but real. Leafy greens that Mom had turned into something resembling actual salads. A handful of peppers that Wengzin guarded jealously, having apparently developed strong opinions about who deserved to eat them. "I planted them," she said, when Dad reached for one during dinner. "I get priority pepper rights." "That's not a real rule," Dad said, but he withdrew his hand anyway, laughing. It was strange, having moments like this. Moments of laughter, of ordinary family bickering, in the middle of a world that had fundamentally broken. But I'd come to understand something over these 2 months that I hadn't fully grasped in my past life. back when survival had been a lonely, desperate scramble. 10 weeks in, the scavengers returned. This time, they weren't retreating from a few infected. 12 figures, better armed than the previous groups, moving with military-style coordination that immediately set off every alarm in my head. This isn't random, Dad said, watching the monitors with the same tightness in his jaw that I felt in my own chest. This is planned. They've been watching us. He was right. The group split into 3 teams, each approaching a different section of our perimeter simultaneously: the front gate, the side entrance, and a section of fence I'd considered secondary, near the back garden wall. They know our layout, Wengzhen said, alarm creeping into her voice. How would they know our layout? I thought about the Zhou family. About the route I'd given them, the supplies, the general direction I'd pointed them toward the checkpoint. The first breach happened at the back garden wall. One of the scavengers had brought cutting tools sophisticated enough to work through the reinforced fence in a way I hadn't fully anticipated, a weakness in my planning that I registered with cold, clear fury even as the alarm blared through the house. Back wall breach. I shouted into the intercom. Dad, cover that position now. He was already moving, rifle raised, taking position at the second-floor window that overlooked the garden. The first scavenger through the breach froze when he saw the rifle aimed at him. Stop right there. Dad's voice was steady, commanding in a way I hadn't heard from him before. Turn around and leave, or I will shoot. The scavenger hesitated, glancing back toward his companions still working at the fence. Then he raised his own weapon. Dad fired first. I reached the front entry hall as the intercom crackled with Wengzhen's voice again. Wenhao, they're retreating. The side gate team is pulling back. I checked the monitors. She was right. Whatever coordination the scavengers had planned, the sound of gunfire and the loss of their companion at the back wall had shattered their confidence entirely. The front gate team was already gone, having apparently fled the moment they heard the shot. I stood in the entry hall, shotgun still in hand, listening to my own pulse slow gradually as the immediate threat receded. Dad appeared moments later, his own weapon lowered but his hands visibly shaking now that the adrenaline was starting to fade. I've never shot anyone before, he said quietly. I know. I don't know how I feel about it. You protected this family, I said. That's what matters right now. You can feel whatever you need to feel about it later, when we're not actively under threat. We didn't sleep much that night, despite the immediate threat having passed. I spent hours reviewing the footage, analyzing exactly how the scavengers had breached the back wall, identifying every weakness they'd exploited so I could reinforce it before they or anyone else tried again. Dad sat with me for most of it, unable to sleep himself, occasionally offering observations from a perspective shaped by his own military experience decades earlier. They'll be more cautious next time, he said. Lost a man, learned our defenses have teeth. Groups like that either give up entirely or come back smarter and more prepared. Which do you think is more likely? He considered the question seriously. Depends on how desperate they are. Desperate people don't always make smart choices. But if they're organized enough to plan a 3-point simultaneous breach, they're probably smart enough to learn from tonight. I didn't like that assessment, but I trusted it. 12 weeks in, the community broadcast from the textile factory was still going strong, and had been joined by a second, similar transmission from a different location, a converted school building closer to the city center. 2 established communities now, Wengzhen reported, having taken over radio monitoring as an addition to her existing supply management duties, both claiming defensible walls, both asking for survivors to make contact. I'd been thinking about this more seriously in the weeks since the scavenger attack. The isolation that had kept us safe for the first 2 months was starting to feel less like a strength and more like a vulnerability. 4 people, however well-trained and well-supplied, could only defend so much for so long against increasingly organized and desperate threats. I think it's time to make contact, I said, during our evening family discussion. Carefully. Not moving there, not yet, but establishing communication. The voice that answered Wengzhen's radio call was cautious but not hostile. This is the Jiangbei textile community. Who's calling? Wengzhen glanced at me. I nodded. This is a family of 4, roughly 20 kilometers from your location. We've been monitoring your broadcast. We wanted to establish contact. A pause. Then, understood. Can you confirm your situation? Supplies, defense capability, health status of all members. I took the radio from Wengzhen. We're stable. Well supplied, well defended. We're not looking for shelter, we have our own secure location. We're interested in establishing communication, possibly alliance, if your community is legitimate. Another pause, longer this time. That's an unusual position. Most people contacting us are looking for a place to go. We prepared early, I said, before the outbreak. We're not desperate. We're cautious. Over the following weeks, contact with Captain Lu's community became a regular, cautious exchange. Information first details about infected movement patterns, warnings about scavenger groups operating in different areas, updates on which parts of the city remained accessible versus which had become too dangerous to approach. Then, slowly, resource discussions. We had surplus we could spare in certain categories. Wengzhen's meticulous inventory management had revealed we'd overbought on some items relative to our actual 4-person household needs. Captain Lu's community had medical expertise we lacked, having attracted 2 actual doctors among their survivor population. We could arrange a supervised exchange, Captain Lu suggested during one radio call. Neutral location, agreed in advance, minimal personnel from both sides. Test the waters before anything more substantial. I discussed it with my family that evening. The supervised exchange happened 2 weeks later, at a predetermined location roughly halfway between our villa and the textile factory community, an abandoned gas station that offered clear sightlines in every direction, making ambush difficult for either side. Dad and I went, armed but not aggressively so, carrying a modest amount of surplus supplies in the SUV. Captain Lu himself came from the other side, along with a younger man he introduced as Wenhao, one of the community's 2 doctors. The exchange itself was straightforward: supplies for medical consultation and a small cache of specific medications Wenhao identified as potentially critical for our long-term health needs that our own stockpile lacked. "You planned remarkably well," Wenhao commented, reviewing the list of supplies I'd brought. "Most people we've encountered were completely unprepared. You had almost a month's head start, based on what you've described." 16 weeks in, winter arrived early and harsh, exactly as I remembered from my past life. Extreme weather patterns that seemed to be an unfortunate side effect of whatever environmental chaos had accompanied the outbreak. The villa's insulation and heating systems, carefully installed months earlier, proved their worth as temperatures plummeted well below anything typical for the region. Outside, the cold seemed to slow the infected somewhat. They still moved, still occasionally appeared on our monitors, but with a sluggishness that suggested the extreme temperatures affected them differently than they affected the living. "Small mercy," Dad commented, watching a lone infected shuffle past on camera, moving at barely half the speed we'd typically observed. Captain Lu's community suffered their first major loss in week 18. He told us over the radio, voice heavier than I'd heard it before. "Infected breach. Not through our main defenses, through a supply run that went wrong. We lost 3 people, including Wenhao." The news hit harder than I expected, given how briefly I'd known the doctor. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "He was good. Really good. We're managing without him, but it's harder now." A pause. "I'm telling you this because I think it's important we're honest with each other. This isn't going to get easier. The world isn't stabilizing. If anything, resources are getting scarcer, threats are getting more desperate." "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "I'm not suggesting anything yet, just being honest about the trajectory. We should keep talking, keep sharing information. Whatever help we can offer each other, we should offer." After the call ended, I sat with my family, discussing what this meant. 20 weeks in, my phone, which I'd kept off since Xiaomei's message weeks earlier, conserving battery for genuine emergencies, buzzed back to life unexpectedly when I plugged it in to check the time. A backlog of messages flooded in, the network apparently having briefly reconnected somewhere in the intervening weeks before failing again. Most were spam, automated alerts, nothing useful. But one, from Xiaomei, dated 3 weeks after her first message, made my chest tighten with something between anger and unwanted pity. "Wenhao, I don't know if you're getting these. I found some other survivors. We're managing, I think. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. For everything. I know it doesn't matter now, probably nothing matters the way it used to, but I needed to say it in case I don't get another chance." I didn't reply. Wengzhen, noticing my expression as I read it, asked quietly, "Her again?" "An old message. From weeks ago." "What did she say?" 24 weeks in 6 months since the outbreak began, Captain Lu's community proposed something significant. "We're considering consolidating," he said over the radio. "Several smaller groups in the area, including yours if you're interested, joining forces at the textile factory. Combined defenses, combined resources, better long-term sustainability than isolated households trying to manage everything alone." It was a serious proposition, one that required careful family discussion. "We've been self-sufficient for 6 months, Dad pointed out during our evening meeting. We know exactly how our systems work, exactly what our defenses can handle. Joining a larger group means trusting systems we didn't build, defenses we don't fully understand." The visit happened a week later, coordinated carefully through radio contact to minimize risk. Dad, Wengzhen, and I made the trip in the SUV, weapons ready but not displayed aggressively, following the route Captain Lu had provided that avoided known infected concentrations. The textile factory was more impressive than I'd expected. Reinforced walls built from salvaged materials, watchtowers manned by rotating guards, a genuine sense of organized community rather than desperate scavenging. Captain Lu met us personally at the gate. "Welcome," he said, shaking my hand with the firm grip of someone used to command. "I appreciate you making the trip." We spent the night at the textile factory, in a guest space Captain Lu arranged, before heading back to the villa the next morning. The experience had given us a lot to think about. "They're well organized," Dad said during the drive back. "Better than I expected, honestly. Captain Lu clearly knows what he's doing." The medical bay was impressive, Wengzhen added. "They've built real infrastructure, not just surviving day to day." I'd noticed something else during the visit: the way the community members interacted, the genuine sense of mutual support rather than the desperate self-interest I'd witnessed among scavenger groups. Children, several of them, playing in a designated safe area while adults worked. A functioning school, of sorts, where someone had organized basic lessons to keep some semblance of normal childhood development happening even in the middle of catastrophe. "It felt human," I said finally. "Not just surviving, actually building something." We decided to integrate gradually rather than abandoning the villa entirely. The compromise, worked out over several radio conversations with Captain Lu, allowed us to maintain the villa as a secondary defensive position while establishing genuine presence and contribution at the textile factory community. Dad and I would rotate between locations, helping strengthen the factory's defenses while maintaining the villa's systems. Mom would spend increasing time at the medical bay, formally training under the remaining doctor while continuing remote consultation for anything requiring her specific expertise. Wengzhen would manage agricultural knowledge transfer, helping establish more sophisticated growing systems at the factory based on what she'd learned through months of trial and error at the villa. "It's not a perfect solution," I acknowledged during our final planning discussion before beginning the transition. "Splitting attention between two locations has its own risks." 7 months into the apocalypse, Captain Lu called an emergency meeting. "We've received intelligence about a large horde movement," he announced to the gathered community, myself and my family included. "Several hundred infected, possibly more, moving in this direction from the collapsed downtown zone. Estimated arrival within 72 hours. The room went tense immediately. "Our defenses can handle scattered infected, even moderate groups," Captain Lu continued. "But a horde of this size is different. We need to prepare for a scenario we haven't faced before." I raised my hand, remembering something from my past life that felt suddenly, terribly relevant. The plan I developed relied on sound. Hordes of this size, from what I remembered, moved toward concentrated noise and activity, drawn by some combination of instinct and whatever remained of the virus's neurological effects on its hosts. "If we create a stronger sound source somewhere away from both the factory and the villa," I explained to the assembled defense team, "and time it correctly relative to the horde's approach, we should be able to redirect their movement before they reach either location." "What kind of sound source?" one of the community's engineers asked. "Something loud, sustained, ideally mechanical rather than something that requires ongoing human presence to maintain," I said. "A vehicle alarm system, industrial equipment, anything that can run automatically for an extended period." We positioned the modified truck 8 kilometers northeast of both the villa and the factory, along a route that intersected the horde's projected path while diverging significantly from our own locations. Dad, myself, and 2 of Captain Lu's most experienced scouts made the trip to set the final configuration, working under cover of pre-dawn darkness to minimize exposure. "Timers set for maximum activation in 90 minutes, the lead scout confirmed, checking the rigged electrical system one final time. "That should put peak noise output right as the horde's leading edge reaches this position, based on the movement data we've been tracking." "And if the timing's off?" Dad asked. "Then we adjust and try again," I said. "But based on everything I've seen so far, hordes like this maintain fairly consistent movement patterns unless something significantly disrupts them. The timing should hold." We retreated to a safe observation distance and waited. We monitored the horde's progress for the next several hours, tracking their movement away from both settlements toward an area of the city that had already been largely evacuated and stripped of resources, territory where their continued presence would cause minimal additional harm. By evening, Captain Lu called another community meeting, this one significantly more celebratory than the previous emergency gathering. "Zero casualties," he announced. "Zero property damage. A threat that could have devastated us, redirected entirely through careful planning and knowledge most of us didn't have." The community's gratitude toward my family, and toward me specifically, was immediate and overwhelming. "How did you know how to do that?" someone asked during the celebration that followed. "That's not common knowledge." Most people have been learning survival tactics through trial and error, same as us. 8 months into the apocalypse, the seasons had cycled through winter into a tentative spring, and the community at the textile factory had grown to nearly 60 people, absorbing several smaller survivor groups that had heard about our successful horde redirection and sought us out specifically. Among the new arrivals, unexpectedly, was Zhou Ping. He found me during a supply distribution shift, his children visibly older, visibly more resilient than the frightened kids I'd sheltered months earlier standing beside him. "I heard there was a community organized by someone who'd predicted the outbreak," he said, disbelief and gratitude mixing in his expression. "I didn't dare hope it was actually you." "You made it," I said, genuine relief flooding through me. "To the checkpoint." It held. Zhou Ping and his children integrated into the community quickly, his skills as a former mechanic proving valuable for maintaining the various vehicles and equipment that kept our combined settlements functioning. "I never got to properly thank you," he said one evening, finding me during a quiet moment after community dinner. "For that night. For giving us a chance when you had every reason not to." "You don't need to thank me," I said. "You survived on your own skill and determination. I just pointed you in a direction." "You pointed us toward survival when we had nothing," he corrected. "That matters more than you're giving yourself credit for." I thought about the calculation I'd made that night, weighing risk against compassion, uncertain whether I was making the right choice even as I opened that side gate. "I almost didn't help you," I admitted. "I was scared of what it might cost my own family." "But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway," I agreed. 10 months in, my phone, which I'd occasionally activated when the fragile network flickered briefly back to life, received one final message from Xiaomei. "I'm dying, Wenhao. Infection from a wound that got worse instead of better. I don't have access to real medical care anymore. I just wanted you to know that whatever happened between us, I did love you, in my own broken way. I'm sorry I couldn't be better than I was." I read the message twice, sitting alone in the villa's command room during a routine monitoring shift. I felt many things reading those words. Not the devastating grief I might have felt in my past life, when her betrayal had been fresh and unprocessed. But not pure indifference either. Something more complicated. A recognition that people could be flawed, could cause real harm, and still contain genuine humanity underneath their failures. I didn't reply immediately. 1 year into the apocalypse, the combined community, now numbering nearly 80 people across both the textile factory and satellite locations including our villa, held a formal anniversary gathering. Captain Lu addressed everyone, his voice carrying the weight of genuine leadership earned through a year of difficult decisions and hard-won successes. "A year ago, most of us were scattered individuals or small family units, uncertain if we'd survive the week, let alone the year," he said. "Today, we're a community. Not perfect, not without loss, but real. Sustainable. Something we've built together." He looked directly at me during the next part of his speech. 14 months in, the community faced its most significant challenge yet, not from infected or scavengers, but from within. A fever spread through the textile factory settlement, striking nearly a third of the population within days, symptoms severe enough to raise immediate fears of a secondary viral threat distinct from the original outbreak. Mom, now formally trained alongside the community's remaining doctor, worked around the clock trying to identify the cause and contain the spread. "It's not the same virus," she confirmed after several days of investigation, exhaustion evident in her voice during a family check-in. "Something opportunistic, probably related to compromised immune systems from months of stress and inadequate nutrition despite our best efforts. Treatable, but dangerous if we can't isolate and manage it properly." 16 months in, the community held a memorial for those we'd lost throughout the past year and a half, not just the 3 fever victims, but everyone who died since our combined settlements had first formed, names read aloud in a ceremony that had become an important monthly tradition. I stood with my family, listening to names of people I'd known well and others I'd barely met before their deaths, feeling the weight of survival that came with genuine cost. "It never gets easier hearing the list grow," Captain Lu said afterward, finding me during the quiet reflection period that followed the ceremony. "But I think it matters that we keep doing this. Keep remembering them as people, not just casualties." "I agree," I said. "You've been quiet lately," he observed. "More than usual, even for you." 18 months in, we received word through community radio networks that the government had established what they were calling a stabilized zone several hundred kilometers south, an area where infrastructure had been at least partially restored, where organized authority was attempting to rebuild something resembling normal civilization. The news sparked significant discussion throughout our combined settlements. "Should we consider relocating?" Wang Xin asked during a family discussion, now 20 years old and carrying herself with a confidence and capability that had grown enormously since the apocalypse began. If there's an actual stabilized zone, wouldn't that be safer long term than continuing to manage everything ourselves out here? I thought about the question carefully. The scouting party returned 6 weeks later with a full report. It's real, the lead scout confirmed during the community meeting called to hear their findings. Not perfect, not fully restored, but genuinely more stable than what we've built here. Actual government infrastructure, functioning food distribution systems, medical facilities with proper equipment and staff. What's the population size? Someone asked. Several thousand, growing steadily as more survivor groups make contact and relocate. They're actively recruiting stable, organized communities like ours, offering integration support, resource sharing, protection from larger threats none of us can fully manage alone long term. The news generated significant excitement, tempered by the same caution that had characterized our community's decision-making throughout the past 18 months. What are the conditions for joining? Captain Liu asked. 20 months in, our combined community made the decision to relocate, integrating with the stabilized southern zone while maintaining our own internal organizational structure and community identity within the larger framework. The transition took months to complete properly, careful logistics ensuring the sick and elderly could travel safely, coordinating transportation of essential supplies and equipment, maintaining security throughout what remained a genuinely dangerous journey despite our extensive preparation and experience. My family traveled together, the villa left behind but not abandoned, designated by community agreement as a secondary emergency retreat, maintained minimally but ready if the stabilized zone's promises proved less reliable than hoped. It's strange, leaving, Mom said during the journey south, watching the familiar landscape gradually shift into unfamiliar territory. That villa saved our lives. Feels wrong to just leave it behind. Within the stabilized zone, our community's reputation preceded us, largely due to the horde redirection strategy that had prevented catastrophic losses during those early, precarious months. I found myself, somewhat reluctantly, drawn into advisory roles for the zone's broader defense and planning committees, my unusual foresight regarding infected behavior patterns and survival strategies proving valuable for a leadership structure still working out how to manage long-term stability in this fundamentally altered world. You have insights the rest of us simply don't, the zone's civilian administrator told me during one particularly involved planning session. I don't fully understand the source, and I've learned not to ask too many probing questions. But the results speak for themselves. 2 years after the outbreak began, the stabilized zone held its first formal remembrance ceremony, honoring everyone lost during the initial chaos and the difficult months of rebuilding that had followed. The ceremony included representatives from every integrated community, each sharing brief accounts of their own survival stories, contributing to a collective record that the zone's administrators were compiling as both memorial and historical documentation. When it came time for our community's representative to speak, Captain Liu deferred to me. You've contributed more to our survival than almost anyone, he said quietly, before I stepped forward to address the gathered crowd. It's fitting that you share our story. I stood before hundreds of survivors, thinking carefully about what to say, how much of the truth I could share without straining credibility beyond what people could reasonably accept. Following the ceremony, I found myself approached by someone I hadn't expected to see again. Shun Kong. Older, thinner, carrying himself with none of the smug confidence I remembered from before the outbreak. In my past life, he'd watched me die while holding hands with the woman I'd loved. Wenhao, he said, voice careful, uncertain. I didn't expect to find you here. I studied him for a long moment, feeling old anger stir but finding it distant now, muted by everything that had happened since. Shen Kong, I said, I heard you died. Xiaomei mentioned it, months ago. His expression flickered with something complicated. I nearly did. Infected bite, but a partial one didn't fully transmit, somehow. I survived, barely, thanks to some experimental treatment a group I fell in with had developed. Xiaomei didn't know. We'd separated before that happened. Separated how? 2.5 years after the outbreak, the stabilized zone had grown into something genuinely resembling a functioning society smaller than the world before, permanently changed by everything that had happened, but real and sustainable in ways that felt increasingly solid rather than precarious. My family had settled into new roles within this evolved world. Dad had taken on responsibility for coordinating security training across multiple integrated communities, his military background and hard-won apocalypse experience making him a valued instructor for the zone's expanding defense forces. Mom had finally completed formal medical certification, working alongside the zone's growing team of doctors and nurses, her self-taught expertise from the earliest, most desperate months finally recognized with proper credentials. During the wedding celebration, I met someone who would become genuinely significant to my own story going forward. Her name was Su Wan, a doctor who'd been working alongside Mom for the past year, someone I'd interacted with professionally several times without ever really taking the time to know beyond surface level courtesy. "Your sister's wedding is beautiful," she said, finding me during a quiet moment near the garden's edge. "I helped Wengzhen plan some of the medical contingencies, actually, in case anything went wrong during the ceremony preparations." "That's very practical," I said, genuinely appreciating the thoughtfulness behind such careful planning even for something as joyful as a wedding. "Practical is what keeps people alive," she said, smiling. I learned that lesson early, working in the medical bay during those first chaotic months. 3 years after I'd woken up outside that bank clutching a $50 million lottery ticket, still reeling from memories of being eaten alive in a version of events I'd worked desperately to prevent, I stood in a garden very similar to the one where Wengzhen had married, preparing to marry Su-Wan myself. My family gathered around us, Dad, visibly emotional despite his usual stoicism. Mom, holding Wengzhen's hand, both of them dressed carefully for the occasion. Wengzhen herself, now a mother, her young daughter Xiaoa playing quietly nearby with toys that Li Feng had carefully guarded from harm throughout months of preparation. Captain Lu attended as well, along with representatives from the community we'd all helped build together, the textile factory survivors, integrated fully now into the broader stabilized zone, still maintaining the bonds of shared survival that had first brought us together during those desperate early months.